Madsen, your methods are outdated. We need instructors who understand modern avionics, not Vietnam-era techniques," Philip Calder announced, his voice amplified by the conference room's acoustics. Victor Madsen sat perfectly still, weathered hands folded on the polished table. His flight instructor's badge, worn for 37 years, caught the fluorescent light. "Sir, with respect, my students have the highest safety ratings in—" "The board has made its decision," Calder cut him off, sliding a folder across the table. "You're being reassigned to ground operations. Administrative duties only." The room of 23 instructors fell silent. No one looked at Victor directly. No one spoke up. "These kids deserve someone who can teach them about the future, not the past," Calder continued, glancing at his watch. "You'll clear out your flight locker by tomorrow." Victor didn't stand, didn't raise his voice, just asked quietly, "And who will take my advanced emergency procedures class?" Calder gestured toward a young man at the end of the table. "Carson here has a PhD in aerospace engineering and 2 years with commercial airlines. Fresh blood." The young instructor shifted uncomfortably, eyes fixed on his tablet. Victor nodded once, picked up the folder and stood. His limp, the one he'd earned pulling 3 men from a burning cockpit in '91, seemed more pronounced than usual as he walked toward the door. What no one noticed was the knowing glance exchanged between Victor and an elderly janitor mopping the hallway floor. A janitor whose uniform bore no decorations, but whose eyes followed Victor with unmistakable recognition. The janitor who had once been Colonel Richard Hargrove, commanding officer of the 117th Rescue Squadron, Persian Gulf. His name was Victor Allen Madsen, and in January of 1991, during Operation Desert Storm, he flew his F-16 directly into a blinding sandstorm to extract 3 downed pilots while under heavy anti-aircraft fire. The mission had been deemed impossible. Command had called it a calculated loss, but Victor calculated differently. At the West Ridge Flight Academy, they knew none of this. They saw only his silver hair, the deep lines framing his eyes, the slight tremor in his left hand when he was tired. They didn't see the man who had once landed a critically damaged aircraft with no hydraulics and 1 engine flaming out. They didn't see the pilot who had written 3 of the emergency protocols still used in military flight training worldwide. 27 years as chief flight instructor," muttered Richard Hargrove, now disguised in janitorial blues, as he methodically mopped the hallway outside the instructor's lounge. 4 distinguished flying crosses, and they put him behind a desk. In the locker room, Victor emptied his flight gear into a cardboard box. His movements were precise, economical. The way he folded his flight suit, corners squared, creases sharp, spoke of military discipline still living in civilian bones. He paused at a faded photograph taped inside his locker door. 5 young men in flight suits, arms thrown around each other's shoulders, standing before a row of fighters. Only 2 had survived the Gulf. Only he still flew. "You always said they'd have to drag you out of the cockpit, Vic," came a voice from behind him. Victor didn't turn. Didn't think it would be a kid in a designer suit doing the dragging, Rich. Richard Hargrove stepped closer, leaning on his mop. "That kid doesn't know you pulled his father out of a burning helicopter in Basra." Victor's eyes narrowed. Calder's father was Marine Corps, copter pilot. "Captain James Calder. Went down 50 miles behind enemy lines. You were the extraction." Victor closed his locker gently. "He doesn't need to know." "Maybe he does," Richard countered. "Maybe they all do." But Victor just shook his head, lifting his box. "We didn't do it for recognition then. Don't need it now." What neither man knew was that Emma Chen, the Academy's senior mechanical engineer, had paused outside the door. She'd come to protest Victor's reassignment. He'd been the only instructor who'd taken her seriously when she'd reported issues with the new flight simulators. Instead, she stood frozen, listening as 2 old warriors spoke of battles fought before she was born. She pulled out her phone and quietly began researching Victor Madsen Persian Gulf Rescue. What she found made her breath catch. The official citation read, "Captain Victor A. Madsen displayed extraordinary heroism while serving as a combat search and rescue pilot. When 3 aircraft were downed during severe weather conditions, Captain Madsen volunteered to attempt rescue despite being advised of near-zero visibility and concentrated enemy fire. His actions directly resulted in the rescue of 7 American servicemen." Emma slipped away before they could notice her, clutching her phone. In her other hand, she held the invitation to the International Flight Simulation Championship, where West Ridge Academy would compete against the world's top flight schools in 2 weeks. the championship where Director Calder had just announced that no instructor over 50 would be permitted to participate. The new simulation center gleamed with technology. 12 state-of-the-art flight simulators stood in a semicircle, their hydraulic platforms and wraparound screens representing $30 million of investment. Corporate sponsors' logos adorned the walls. Television crews adjusted cameras for the upcoming championship. Victor sat alone in the observation room, reviewing student evaluation forms. Administrative work, his new assignment. Through the glass, he watched as Carson, the young instructor who had replaced him, led a group of international visitors through the facility. The young man spoke confidently about reaction times, neural interfaces, augmented reality overlays. "Our youngest instructor is 26, Carson boasted to the visitors. "We believe fresh perspectives are essential in modern aviation training." Victor made no reaction, just continued his paperwork. Emma Chen slipped into the room carrying a tablet. "Mr. Madsen, I need your signature on the maintenance logs." He glanced up, nodding. As he signed the digital form, Emma spoke quietly. "The simulator programming for the championship is flawed." Victor paused, pen hovering over the screen. "Explain." "They're using atmospheric turbulence patterns that don't match real-world physics. I've flagged it 3 times. Nobody listens." "Did you tell Calder?" Emma's expression tightened. "He said I should stick to fixing things, not questioning their design." Victor handed the tablet back. "Not your problem anymore, Ms. Chen. I'm just the paperwork guy now." But Emma didn't move. "There's more. The rescue scenario they've programmed, it's based on an actual Gulf War incident." She hesitated. "Your incident, sir." Victor's face remained impassive, but his knuckles whitened slightly. "They've modified it, made it more dramatic for the competition, but they've removed the sandstorm visibility factors and the fuel calculation variables. That makes it unrealistic," Victor said quietly. "Exactly, and potentially teaches dangerous responses." Victor leaned back in his chair. "Why are you telling me this?" Emma straightened her shoulders. "Because you're the only one who's actually done it." Through the glass, they watched as Calder joined the tour group, placing a casual arm around Carson's shoulders. The director was gesturing toward the central simulator, the championship unit. "Our pilot will face the ultimate challenge," Calder was saying. "A scenario so difficult it's practically impossible, designed by our team to push the limits of human capability." Victor's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. A quiet recognition. They had taken his greatest triumph, a rescue that had defined his career, that had saved lives against impossible odds, and turned it into a spectacle, a game. Later that evening, as the facility emptied, Richard Hargrove found Victor sitting alone in the darkened simulator room. "They don't know what they're doing, Rich," Victor said without looking up. "They've programmed a scenario that would kill everyone involved." Richard leaned on his mop. "Then maybe someone should show them how it's really done." Victor shook his head. "I'm grounded, remember? Administrative duty only." "Since when did that ever stop you?" Richard asked, a gleam in his eye. "Wasn't it you who took that unauthorized flight to extract Matthews when they said it couldn't be done?" For the first time that day, Victor smiled. Just slightly. "That was a long time ago. Not so long that you've forgotten how." As they spoke, neither noticed Emma Chen working late in her office across the hall. The door cracked open just enough to hear their conversation. She looked down at the championship program in her hands, then at her computer screen showing Victor Madsen's classified military record, the one she'd accessed using her brother's Pentagon credentials. Silently, she made a decision and began to type. The International Flight Simulation Championship drew crowds beyond the Academy's expectations. Representatives from 12 countries filled the observation deck. Military attachés, airline executives, aerospace journalists, all gathered to watch as the world's best pilots faced the impossible scenario. Victor sat in the back row, administrative folder on his lap, invisible among the spectators. Richard stood nearby, mop in hand, seemingly engaged in endless cleaning of the already spotless floor. Carson, wearing Westridge Academy's official flight suit, adjusted his headset as he prepared to enter the simulator. Calder stood nearby, speaking confidently to the judges. "Our simulator presents the most challenging rescue scenario ever programmed," Calder boasted, "based on actual combat conditions but enhanced for modern training purposes." In the front row, a silver-haired man in a crisp military uniform listened intently. General Michael Lawson, head judge of the competition and former Air Force commander of Pacific Operations, frowned slightly at Calder's words. The first 3 pilots, from Germany, Japan, and Canada, failed within minutes. The simulator's hydraulics bucked violently as each pilot lost control, the screens flashing red with mission failure and casualties total. Carson entered fourth, confident smile in place. He lasted longer, his technical knowledge evident in his approach. But 7 minutes in, as the simulated sandstorm intensified and enemy fire indicators blared, his aircraft spiraled into the ground. "Reset," called Calder, visibly tense. "System error." Emma Chen, monitoring the simulator's outputs from her station, shook her head. "No error, sir. The scenario is functioning as programmed." Calder glared at her, then turned to the judges with a strained smile. "Perhaps we should adjust the difficulty." "The parameters are approved and locked," General Lawson interrupted. "Per competition rules." The Brazilian and British pilots followed, each failing faster than Carson. The audience murmured uncomfortably. This wasn't the showcase of skill they had expected. It was becoming a demonstration of an impossible task. After the 8th consecutive failure, General Lawson stood. "Mr. Calder, a word." They conferred quietly, but their body language told the story. Calder gesturing defensively, the general stone-faced and immovable. Finally, Calder turned to address the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing some technical complications. The scenario is accurate," General Lawson interrupted, taking the microphone. "What's inaccurate is your understanding of it." He scanned the room slowly, his eyes finally settling on the back row. "This simulation is based on a real Gulf War extraction, January 22, 1991. 3 aircraft down, 7 crew members stranded in a sandstorm under heavy fire with rapidly depleting survival oxygen." The room fell silent. "What your programmers failed to understand," the general continued, "is that this mission was indeed impossible by standard protocols. It succeeded only because one pilot abandoned the rulebook and invented a new approach that has since become doctrine." His gaze fixed directly on Victor. "That pilot is in this room." Heads turned, eyes searched. Victor sat perfectly still, his expression unchanged. "Captain, forgive me. Commander Victor Madsen," General Lawson said, his voice carrying authority that silenced even the whispers. "Would you please step forward?" Victor didn't move at first. Then, slowly, he placed his folder on the chair and stood. He walked down the center aisle, his slight limp the only sound in the hushed room. Calder's face drained of color. "General, this is highly irregular. Mr. Madsen is no longer a flight instructor. He's administrative staff." "Is that so?" The general raised an eyebrow. "The man who wrote the extraction protocol your simulator is attempting to test is filing paperwork?" Emma Chen stepped forward from her station. "Sir, I can confirm that Commander Madsen's original flight path is not accurately represented in our program. We made modifications." "Modifications," the general repeated flatly, "to a maneuver that saved 7 lives and earned a distinguished flying cross." He turned to Victor, who had stopped at the front of the room. "Commander, would you be willing to demonstrate the actual approach you used that day?" Victor looked at the simulator, then at Calder, whose expression had shifted from shock to barely concealed panic. "I'm a bit out of practice, General," Victor said quietly. General Lawson smiled. "Like riding a bike for men like us, isn't it, Commander?" And throughout the room, something changed. The international pilots leaned forward. The military attachés straightened in their seats. They recognized what was happening. The passing of knowledge that can't be programmed, can't be simulated, can only be carried in the hands and minds of those who have faced the impossible and returned. As Victor stepped toward the simulator, one of the younger pilots, the German national champion, stood and saluted him. Then another rose, and another. Not because they had to, but because they knew what they were about to witness was not a competition performance. It was history, alive and walking among them. And if you want to see moments where forgotten heroes are remembered, where true expertise silences arrogance, you're in the right place. The simulator's hydraulic platform hummed to life as Victor settled into the pilot's seat. His movements were unhurried, deliberate. He adjusted the seat with the familiarity of someone returning to a childhood home, fingers finding switches and controls without needing to look. "Our simulator uses the latest neural interface technology," Calder announced nervously to the audience. "It might take Mr. Madsen some time to adjust to." "I've flown everything from Sopwith Camels to F-35s, son," Victor interrupted quietly, not looking up as he continued his pre-flight check. "I'll manage." A ripple of laughter moved through the audience. Calder stepped back, face flushing. General Lawson nodded to Emma. Load the original parameters, Ms. Chen. No modifications. Emma's fingers flew across her keyboard. Restoring actual Gulf War meteorological data and enemy position intelligence from January 22, 1991. The simulator's screens came alive, displaying a swirling, impenetrable sandstorm. Visibility, 0. Wind shear warnings flashed red. Radar showed 3 downed aircraft scattered across hostile territory, with enemy anti-aircraft positions surrounding them. The room fell silent as Victor began. From the first movement, it was clear they were watching something extraordinary. Where the previous pilots had fought the sandstorm, Victor slipped into it. Where they had attempted to power through turbulence, he seemed to anticipate each invisible air pocket, adjusting milliseconds before impact. He's not following any standard approach vector, one of the airline executives whispered. Because there isn't one, General Lawson replied. Watch. Victor's aircraft descended into the heart of the storm, flying lower than any of the previous attempts. Alarm warnings blared, proximity alerts, radar lock warnings, fuel consumption indicators all flashing critical. Yet his hands remained steady, his breathing even. The simulated aircraft skimmed just meters above the desert floor, using the terrain itself as cover from enemy radar. Impossible, breathed the Brazilian pilot who had failed earlier. The turbulence alone would... He's riding the pressure waves, Emma explained, eyes fixed on her readouts. Using the storm itself for lift and concealment simultaneously. When Victor reached the first downed pilot, he didn't hover as the others had tried. Instead, he executed a rolling landing, a maneuver no rescue helicopter was ever designed to perform, keeping the engines spooled and ready for immediate takeoff. One by one, he retrieved each stranded crew member, never remaining stationary long enough for enemy targeting systems to lock. His flight path between rescue points ignored all conventional approaches, instead weaving an unintuitive pattern that slowly revealed its genius. He was using each enemy anti-aircraft position against the others, ensuring he was always in the radar shadow of another threat. 23 minutes later, all 7 simulated crew members were secured, and Victor was navigating back through the sandstorm. As he crossed into friendly airspace, the simulator screens shifted to green, displaying mission successful, casualties 0. The room erupted. Pilots, judges, executives, all on their feet, not applauding, not cheering, but standing in silent recognition of what they had witnessed. Victor powered down the simulator and rose slowly from the seat. His expression hadn't changed, but his eyes held something that had been missing for months: purpose. General Lawson approached him first, extending his hand. Still the best sandstorm navigator in the business, Madsen. Victor accepted the handshake with a slight nod. The scenario was accurate, well programmed. Emma smiled from her station. I used the original flight recorder data, sir, from your actual mission. Calder stood frozen at the edge of the platform. His earlier confidence evaporated. When Victor approached him, he visibly tensed. Mr. Calder, Victor said, voice level. Commander Madsen. Calder managed to reply. I didn't know. No, Victor agreed. You didn't ask. The room remained hushed, watching the exchange. Victor didn't raise his voice, didn't demand apology. He simply extended his hand. Your father was a brave man, Captain James Calder, Marine Corps helicopter pilot. I had the honor of bringing him home in '91. Calder's expression shifted from confusion to shock. My father was... You were the extraction pilot. Victor nodded once. He shielded 2 injured crew members with his own body during the firefight, kept them alive until we arrived. Calder's hand trembled slightly as he took Victor's. He never told me. He never talked about how he got home. Some things are hard to put into words, Victor said simply. And in that moment, the distance between them, between generations, between experience and theory, between memory and innovation, seemed to shrink, just slightly. General Lawson placed a hand on Victor's shoulder. The Joint Chiefs have been developing a new combat rescue training initiative, combining veteran experience with next-generation technology. He looked meaningfully at Victor. We need someone who speaks both languages to lead it. Victor's eyebrow raised slightly. I'm a bit old for active duty, General. Not asking you to fly combat missions, Lawson replied. Asking you to teach others how to think like you did in that sandstorm. Some things can't be programmed, Madsen. They can only be passed on. The watching crowd had grown silent again, witnessing the quiet redemption unfolding before them, not with speeches, not with dramatic confrontations, but with the simple recognition of value that transcends age. Calder cleared his throat. The Academy would be honored to host such a program, General. He looked at Victor, with Commander Madsen leading our instructor team, of course. Victor studied the younger man for a moment, then nodded once. We'll need to revise your simulator programming, starting with those turbulence algorithms. Emma smiled from her station. Already working on it, sir? As the crowd began to disperse, the pilots who had failed the simulation approached Victor one by one. Not for autographs, not for photos, but with questions. Specific technical questions about wind shear compensation, about radar evasion, about instinctive navigation when instruments fail. And Victor answered each one, his voice growing more animated with each explanation. For the first time in months, he was teaching again, passing on what could never be contained in manuals or programming code. Carson, the young instructor who had replaced him, hung back until the others had finished. Finally, he approached Victor. I didn't know, he said quietly, about any of it. Victor nodded. No reason you should have. I'd like to learn, Carson said. Not just the technical aspects, the thinking behind it. Victor studied him for a moment, then gestured toward the simulator. First lesson starts now. Let me show you what happens when the sandstorm is combined with a night approach. And as they walked back to the simulator together, the decorated veteran and the young instructor, something profound had shifted in the room. Not just in how they saw Victor, but in how they understood the nature of expertise itself. Not as something that expires with age, but as something that deepens, that transforms from technique into wisdom. 6 months later, the Westridge Advanced Rescue Training Center opened its doors. What had once been a single room of simulators had expanded to occupy an entire wing of the Academy. Above the entrance, a simple plaque read, "The difference between the impossible and the possible lies in a person's determination." Victor Masson stood near the window of his new office, watching as students from 3 military branches and 7 civilian agencies filed into the simulator bay. His reflection in the glass showed a man transformed, still silver-haired, still bearing the slight limp, but standing straighter, eyes clearer. Emma Chen knocked on his open door, tablet in hand. "The new Gulf Storm program is ready, Commander. With your adjustments implemented." Victor nodded. "And the instructor assignments?" "Carson has the morning sessions. You're scheduled to observe and provide feedback." She hesitated. "Director Calder asked if you'd lead the afternoon briefing yourself. The Joint Chiefs representatives specifically requested it." A smile touched the corner of Victor's mouth. "Tell him I'll be there." As Emma turned to leave, she paused. "Commander, the letters are still coming in. From pilots you've trained over the years. We've received over 300 now." Victor glanced at the wall where a single framed letter hung. Not a commendation, not an award certificate, but a handwritten note from a pilot whose life he'd saved in that long-ago sandstorm. Route them to the historical archives. They're building something there. What he didn't say was how each letter had restored something in him that had begun to fade. Not pride, but purpose. The quiet knowledge that some lessons can only be passed from one generation to another through direct transmission, through stories told and retold, through hands guiding hands. From the simulator room, Victor heard Carson's voice explaining the preliminary briefing to the new students. The young instructor had proved himself an eager apprentice, absorbing Victor's knowledge while adding his own innovations. Together, they had bridged what had seemed an insurmountable gap. Richard Hargrove, no longer disguised as a janitor, but now officially the center's historical accuracy consultant, joined Victor at the window. "Not bad for a couple of old war dogs," he said, nodding toward the busy training floor. Victor's eyes followed a group of young pilots listening intently as Carson explained the sandstorm scenario. "They still have much to learn, and we still have much to teach," Richard replied. "That's the thing about wisdom, Vic. It doesn't expire. It just waits for someone wise enough to seek it out." Later that afternoon, as Victor led the Joint Chiefs representatives through the facility, General Lawson pulled him aside. "The data from your first training cohort is impressive, Madsen. Survival rates in the impossible scenarios are up 47%. Victor nodded. "The students are exceptional." "It's not just the students," Lawson countered. "It's the integration of experience with innovation. Neither works without the other." They paused at the observation window, watching as Calder demonstrated a new simulator feature to a group of international visitors. The director caught Victor's eye and nodded respectfully, a small gesture that spoke volumes about how far they had come. "You know what the greatest danger in aviation is, Lawson?" Victor asked quietly. The general raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" The belief that we've mastered it, Victor replied. The moment we think we've conquered the sky is the moment it reminds us of our limitations. Lawson nodded slowly. That's why we need men like you, to remind us of what we don't know. As the day's training concluded, Victor gathered the students for a final briefing. The room fell silent as he stepped to the front, not from fear or formality, but from a deep respect that had been earned rather than demanded. Aviation has two teachers, he began, his voice steady and clear. Technology and time. One moves forward, the other moves through. Your challenge is to learn from both. He gestured toward Carson and the younger instructors. These men and women will teach you the cutting edge, the newest systems, the latest techniques, the boundaries of what's currently possible. Then he pointed to himself and Richard. We will teach you what remains constant. The wind doesn't care about your advanced degree. Gravity doesn't negotiate. The sandstorm doesn't read your operational manual. A smile, rare but genuine, crossed his weathered face. Between these two schools of thought lies wisdom, not in choosing one over the other, but in knowing when each applies. As the students filed out, a young female pilot lingered behind. Commander Madsen? She asked hesitantly. My grandfather flew with you in the Gulf. He said you were the best stick and rudder man he ever saw. Victor studied her for a moment. What's your grandfather's name? Lieutenant Colonel James Wilson, sir. Victor's expression softened. Jimmy Wilson. Couldn't navigate his way out of a paper bag, but the finest wingman I ever had. He smiled at her surprised expression. Tell him Madsen says he still owes me a beer. The young pilot grinned. I will, sir. And as she left, Victor turned back to the window, watching as the sun set over the academy grounds. In the reflection, he could see not just himself, but the generations before him and the generations to come. An unbroken line of those who dared to fly into storms, who carried forward the accumulated wisdom of the sky. Some men leave legacies in medals, some in monuments, but the finest legacy is written in the actions of those who follow. Those who fly safely home because of lessons passed down, hand to hand, heart to heart, through the unforgiving classroom of the sky. He touched the faded wings pinned to his chest. The same wings he'd received as a young man, now carried with the quiet dignity of one who had earned every scuff and tarnish. Some wisdom comes only with years. Some courage is revealed only when tested. And some men are never too old to show the world what impossible really means. Before you leave this story behind, remember there are Victor Madsens all around us. Quiet heroes whose greatest achievements remain unsung, whose deepest wisdom goes untapped until someone has the courage to ask, to listen, to learn. Their time has not passed. Their value has not diminished. They're just waiting for their moment to fly once more. There's something powerful about watching someone who's been dismissed prove their worth through quiet excellence. No shouting, no demands for respect, just the undeniable demonstration of mastery that cannot be faked and cannot be denied. How many Victor Madsens walk among us today? How many veterans, seniors, and experienced professionals have we pushed aside simply because their expertise doesn't come packaged in youth or wrapped in the latest terminology? True wisdom isn't measured in years or degrees. It's measured in lives touched, in lessons passed forward, in knowledge that survives when technology fails and theories collapse. It's found in the hands that still remember what textbooks have forgotten. Who in your life deserves to be seen beyond their age? Who carries wisdom you've overlooked? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story touched something in you, if you believe that some heroes don't wear capes but instead wear the quiet dignity of experience, subscribe and enable notifications, because there are more stories to tell, more wisdom to uncover, and more quiet heroes waiting to be remembered.